The alarm on Admiral Marcus Weston's phone was set for 4:15 every morning, but he was never asleep when it went off. He had not been a man who slept past 4 since his second tour in the Gulf, when the particular discipline of rising before the world became less a habit, and more a form of respect for the day, for the work, for the people depending on him to be ready before they were. He silenced the alarm before it could make a sound, dressed in the dark, with the practiced efficiency of a man who had learned to move quietly in spaces where other people slept, and went downstairs to the kitchen of the house on Sycamore Crest. He made coffee the way he made everything, without waste, without ceremony. While it brewed, he stood at the kitchen window and looked out at the driveway where the shape of the thing he had purchased 3 weeks ago sat beneath a gray canvas cover waiting. He had driven it home himself, covered it himself, and told Pearl not to say a word. Pearl, who was 71 years old and had never in her life kept a secret she didn't want to keep, had looked at him with the expression she reserved for moments when she agreed with a decision but had opinions about the execution. He poured his coffee. He sat at the kitchen table and opened the manila envelope he had prepared the night before, inside a folded note in his handwriting, 2 words on the center of the page. He placed it on the table with the spare key on top of it. The keychain, a single polished ring with no decoration, because Marcus Weston did not believe in decorative keychains any more than he believed in unnecessary adjectives. Then he picked up his briefcase, looked at the envelope one more time, and walked out the front door at 4:50 in the morning. He drove to Langford Naval Station in the dark, the road empty, the base perimeter visible 2 miles out from the glow of the security lights along the fence line. At the gate, Corporal Deshaun Briggs was already at his post as he always was, and he snapped a crisp salute as the Admiral's staff car rolled through. "Morning, sir." "Morning, Corporal." "Good night." "Quiet, sir." Marcus nodded and kept driving. He liked quiet nights. He had seen enough of the other kind. Upstairs in the house on Sycamore Crest, Imani Weston was still asleep at 4:50 in the morning because she was 18 years old and had graduated from Jefferson Preparatory Academy the previous afternoon, and had cried exactly once in the parking lot afterward, a single controlled collapse behind her grandmother. Pearl's wide-shoulder private and brief, before reassembling herself for the photographs and the dinner and the evening that followed. She had gone to bed at 11 and slept the deep gravity-pulled sleep of someone whose body had been held at tension for months and was finally in the dark of the first night after it was over, allowed to let go. She did not hear her father leave. She had not heard him leave on a single morning in the 18 years she had been alive, though she had known about it since she was small. When she was 5 or 6, she used a pad to the top of the stairs in her socks and listen for the sound of the front door, a sound so careful it was almost not a sound at all, the deliberate not-click of a man who had learned in places where sound traveled wrong to move through the world without disturbing it. She would hear it and stand there at the top of the stairs in the dark, feeling simultaneously safe and hollow. The 2 feelings she associated most completely with having a father who belonged to something larger than a household. She didn't go to the top of the stairs anymore. She had grown out of it the way you grow out of things that once felt necessary and then one day simply don't. But on this particular morning of June 17th, the Tuesday after her graduation, the morning of her 18th birthday, she woke at 7:12 to the smell of something sweet coming through the floor vents, and she lay still for a moment with her eyes open, letting it reach her before the day could start. Cinnamon, brown sugar, the particular caramelized warmth of Pearl's cast-iron skillet, French toast which Pearl reserved for mornings that required celebration, though she would never describe it in those terms. If you asked Pearl why she was making French toast, she would say she had bread that was going stale, and it seemed a shame to waste it. She had been saying this for 30 years. No one in the family believed her anymore, and no one said so, because some rituals are more meaningful for being left unexamined. Imani lay still for another 30 seconds. Then she remembered what day it was. Then she remembered what the garage held. Then she sat up. She paused at her desk the way she did every morning. Now the letter pinned above it at eye level, the paper gone soft at the folds from handling. Dear Miss Imani J., Weston, it is with great pleasure that the United States Naval Academy offers you admission to the class of 2029. She had received it in March. She had read it so many times the words had lost their shape and become something else, not language exactly, but proof. The concrete physical evidence that what she had been working toward had a destination. She did not read it this morning. She just looked at it for 3 seconds and let it be true. Then she went downstairs. Pearl was at the stove. Her back turned, the wide shoulders of her housecoat moving as she stirred something that did not need stirring. She did not turn around when Imani came into the kitchen. Happy birthday, baby. Thank you, Aunt Pearl. There's a note on the table. Imani looked. The manila envelope was there with the keychain sitting on top of it, glinting under the overhead light. She picked up the note and unfolded it. Drive. She looked at Pearl, who was still not turning around. Aunt Pearl, go on, child. Garage doors up. Imani went out through the side door in her pajamas, pale blue cotton, a graduation gift from Pearl's sister in Savannah that she had opened 2 nights ago and immediately put on. The June air was already warm at 7 in the morning, heavy with the particular weight of a southern summer that has decided to arrive early and stay indefinitely. The neighborhood was still mostly asleep. A mockingbird somewhere in the magnolia tree 3 doors down was cycling through its repertoire. She saw it before she fully processed what she was seeing. The canvas cover had been removed. The car sat in the garage with the overhead light on the way. You present something you want seen, and it was the color of the sky at the precise moment before it decides to become night. Not black, not quite blue. A blue so dark it absorbed light rather than reflected it, so that the whole surface seemed to breathe rather than shine. It was a Maserati Levante, and it was the most beautiful object Imani Weston had ever seen in her life, and her very first thought. The most honest thought that arrived before any other was that it belonged to someone else, that there had been some spectacular administrative error involving the garage and a neighbor and an extremely dramatic vehicle. She stood on the concrete step for a full 60 seconds. Then she saw the license plate, Imani 18. She walked around to the driver's side. Tucked under the windshield wiper, a folded note in her father's handwriting. She unfolded it, standing in the driveway in her pajamas with the June air warm around her and the neighborhood still quiet. Baby girl, you worked for this. You earned this. Drive safely. Love, Dad. She sat down on the front step and cried for approximately 4 minutes. Before the phone call, before the blue lights, before the handcuffs and the convoy and the parking lot that would appear on every screen in North Carolina by nightfall. Before all of it, on the front step of the house on Sycamore Crest, Imani Weston was just an 18-year-old girl who had received the most beautiful gift of her life and was crying because her father had left before sunrise to go command 48,000 sailors, and she could not tell him she loved him in person, and some feelings require crying whether you have time for it or not. Before you can understand what happened in the parking lot of Crestfield Plaza on the afternoon of June 17th, there are things you need to understand about Admiral Marcus Jared Weston. He grew up in Robeson County, North Carolina, in a house at the end of a road that dead-ended into a field. His parents worked. His father drove a delivery truck for a regional grocery chain. His mother was a licensed practical nurse who worked double shifts at the county hospital 3 days a week and slept on the 4th. They were not poor in the way that announces itself with drama. They were poor in the way that requires management, the kind of poverty that is less a condition than a full-time administrative task, a constant optimization of which necessity goes unmet this week. so another necessity can be met next week. Marcus was 9 years old when his father had a stroke at the wheel of the delivery truck on a Wednesday morning and ran off Route 211 into a drainage ditch. He survived, but the left side of his body did not fully survive with him. He could walk with a cane. He could not drive. He could not lift. He could not work. He went on disability, and the check was not enough. And Marcus' mother picked up a fourth shift, and the family reorganized itself around the new reality, the way families do quietly without ceremony. Because there are no ceremonies for the reorganization of ordinary people's lives. Marcus graduated from Lumberton High School at 17 with a 4.1 GPA and a scholarship to UNC Pembroke, which he deferred because a scholarship to Pembroke still required money he did not have, and the Navy was offering a different proposition. You give us your time, we give you a future. He enlisted at 17 with his mother's signature on the parental consent form. She drove him to the recruiter's office in Fayetteville and sat in the waiting room while he signed the papers. And when he came out, she hugged him for a long time and said nothing because there was nothing to say that the hug did not already contain. That was 33 years ago. Now in June of this year, Rear Admiral Marcus J. Weston, 4 stars. Because the Navy grades its admirals on a scale, and 4 is the top commanded naval station. Langford, the largest naval installation in the southeastern United States. Home to 22,000 active duty personnel, 12,000 civilian employees, and a combined operational capacity that made it one of the most significant military installations on the Atlantic seaboard. He had spent 33 years earning those stars. 2 deployments to the Persian Gulf, 1 to the Horn of Africa, command of a destroyer, then a carrier strike group, then the installation itself, promotions that came not through politics or connections, but through the particular kind of performance that other officers noticed and remembered and talked about in rooms Marcus was not in. He made $189,000 a year. He owned the house on Sycamore Crest outright. He had invested carefully and spent modestly for 3 decades because he had grown up in a house where money was a resource to be managed rather than a comfort to be enjoyed. And that particular understanding, once installed, does not fully leave you. He had thought for most of his adult life about what it would mean to give his daughter the thing he had never had at 18, the concrete, physical, undeniable proof that the work had mattered, that there had been a destination, that you could begin at one end of a very long road and arrive at the other end carrying something. So, yes, he bought his only child a Maserati Levante for her 18th birthday. Because she had a 4.4 GPA, because she was the captain of the Jefferson Prep cross-country team for 3 years and had won the regional championship in her sophomore season, because she was the first student from Crestfield County in 13 years to gain admission to the United States Naval Academy at Annapolis, because his great-aunt Pearl had once worked a 16-hour shift on a concrete floor rather than spend money on a motel room, and he had never forgotten that. And he wanted his daughter to grow up in a world that felt wider than that floor, because he could. When Imani called him at 7:22 that morning crying so hard he could barely parse the words, Marcus Weston sat at his desk at Langford headquarters and listened and felt something in his chest that he could not have named and did not try to. It was not quite joy. It was something more layered than joy, the particular feeling of having built something carefully over a long time, and then seeing the person you built it for receive it and understanding all at once the full weight of what it had cost and deciding the cost was correct. "Dad," she managed, "this is too much." "It is not," he said. "It's a $190,000 car. I know what it is. I bought it." "Dad, you earned it," he said. That's the end of the conversation on that subject. She was quiet for a moment, her breathing evening out. and he sat at his desk and let the quiet settle, and then he made a decision he had been weighing since 4 in the morning. He said it because not saying it was its own kind of failure, a different kind, a softer kind, the kind that feels like protection but is actually avoidance dressed up as love. Imani. Yes, sir. People are going to make assumptions about you and that car. You know what I'm telling you. A pause. When she spoke, her voice was careful. Yes, sir. Head up. Hands visible. Drive carefully. If you're ever stopped, comply first and we fight later. Together. You understand me? Yes, sir. Good. Now go enjoy your birthday. He hung up and turned back to his readiness reports and tried not to think about the specific particular weight of what he had just done. Bought his daughter the most beautiful gift he could imagine, and in the same breath handed her the instructions for how to survive receiving it. That was the arithmetic of their lives. The gift and the warning always delivered together, always necessary, always true. 3 hours and 48 minutes later, she was going to need to remember every word. At noon, Marcus Weston did something he almost never did on a Tuesday. He drove home. His chief of staff, Commander Harriet Knox, had looked at him at 11:45 with the quiet discernment of someone who had worked for him for 3 years and understood the difference between an admiral who was distracted and an admiral who needed permission to be a father. And she had said, Sir Ill, hold whatever comes in. He hadn't argued. Some things outranked operational routine, and his daughter's first drive in the car he had spent 3 decades preparing to give her was one of them. He sat in the passenger seat and let her drive. She was careful with it, almost excessively careful, the way new drivers are careful when they are acutely aware of being watched. Keeping both hands on the wheel, checking mirrors at deliberate intervals, accelerating and braking with conscious smoothness. The car was built for a different relationship with the road, and she was treating it like a library. He found this correct and appropriate and quietly moving in a way he would not have been able to articulate. People stared as they drove through the neighborhood. They always would. A man walking a retriever on Chamberlain Court stopped and turned. 2 kids on bicycles craned their necks. A woman backing out of her driveway mid-maneuver paused and looked. Eyes on the road, Marcus said. I know. Not on them. Dad, I know. He almost smiled. He walked back to his staff car at 12:50 and told her he would see her at dinner. She called after him from the driveway. Thank you, Dad. He raised one hand without turning around, a gesture that meant, you're welcome, and I'm proud of you, and be careful all at once, because he was a man who had learned to carry multiple truths in a single motion. At 2:00 in the afternoon, Imani Weston left Sycamore Crest for the 2nd time that day. She was meeting 3 friends from Jefferson Prep at a restaurant in downtown Crestfield to celebrate graduation and her birthday. To get there from Sycamore Crest, you took Route 7 south, which ran through the commercial corridor just outside the Langford perimeter fence. She drove with the conscientious attention of someone who understood in a way that many young drivers do not, that the margin for error was not distributed equally, and who had been reminded of that fact just this morning by the one person in the world whose voice she trusted most. The Maserati crossed the intersection at Route 7 and Caldwell Avenue at 2:31 in the afternoon, passing within clear line of sight of Naval Station Langford's Gate 2. At Gate 2, Corporal Deshaun Briggs was running a standard vehicle check when the midnight blue Levante rolled by on the public road. He recognized it immediately. The car had been a topic of conversation at the 7:00 duty change. The kind of story that moves through a military installation, the way good news always does, with a kind of shared warmth, a collective acknowledgement that one of their own had done something generous and fine. Briggs watched it continue south toward Crestfield Junction and returned his attention to the gate. Half a mile behind Imani in the parking lot of a strip mall at the corner of Route 7, and Mercer Boulevard officer Dale Pruitt was in his patrol car eating a late lunch and watching the road. Dale Pruitt was 38 years old, and he had been a police officer for 11 of those years, the last 5 of them assigned to the Route 7 corridor through Crestfield. He was not a large man, medium height, medium build, but he carried himself with the particular density of someone who has spent a long time being the most important person in every room he entered, or at least believing he was. He had brown hair going thin at the crown, a jaw that was always slightly set, and a way of looking at things at people specifically that was less observation than categorization. His colleagues in the Crestfield PD called him sharp, said he had good instincts, said he could read a situation before most people even registered there was a situation to read. This was the language they used, and they used it in good faith because they were working from the same data. Pruitt gave them his own account of his own stops, his own narrative of his own decisions, his own story about what good policing looked like. What they were not doing, what no one in the Crestfield PD had done in 11 years, was looking at the actual numbers. If someone had looked at the numbers, they would have found the following in 5 years on the Route 7 corridor. Officer Dale Pruitt had conducted 431 traffic stops. Of those 431 stops, 71% involved drivers of color. The proportion of drivers of color on Route 7 based on the traffic composition data the department had been collecting since 2019 as part of a state reporting requirement and had never once analyzed was 34%. The disparity was not subtle. It was not borderline. It was the kind of gap that if someone had put a ruler to it would have required an explanation that had nothing to do with traffic patterns or public safety. No one had put a ruler to it. The data sat in the county's traffic management database, accurate and unreviewed, accumulating evidence of a pattern that no one was looking for. Pruitt's record included 9 formal complaints over 6 years. 7 of those complaints came from drivers of color. All 9 had been processed by the police union, reviewed by the department, and resolved without disciplinary action. Resolved in the precise bureaucratic sense that means closed without finding, which is different from investigated and found baseless, though the department's files did not make that distinction visible. Chief Harlan Webb had twice requested a deeper review of Pruitt's stop data, and twice been told by the union's legal counsel that without a specific documented incident of misconduct, a pattern-based investigation would constitute a fishing expedition that would not survive an arbitration challenge. Webb had accepted this. He was not a coward, exactly. He was a man who had learned which hills were worth dying on, and in his calculation this particular hill without a smoking gun was not. Officer Sean Garrity had been riding with Pruitt for 8 weeks. He was 22 years old, fresh from the academy, with the kind of idealism that hadn't yet been ground down to a nub, but was definitely showing wear at the edges. He had grown up in Mooresville, played 4 years of high school, baseball, read the police reform literature his academy instructors had assigned, and some they hadn't, and arrived at Crestfield PD with a genuine belief that the job was what you made it, that you could be good at it and also be good, and that those two things were not in conflict. 8 weeks with Dale Pruitt was in the process of educating him differently, not through any single dramatic moment, but through the accumulated weight of small compressions, the way Pruitt described stops before they happened, the particular language he used about certain neighborhoods and certain vehicles and certain types of people, the way questions were not so much answered as absorbed and redirected. Garrity had learned to feel uncomfortable about specific things, and to have no language for that discomfort, which is perhaps the most disabling kind of discomfort there is. Pruitt looked up from his lunch when the Maserati rolled through the intersection. He put the sandwich down. There was no hesitation in it, just the reflex of a man whose patterns have become over time indistinguishable from instinct. Garrity noticed the shift in Pruitt's posture before he said anything, the way his shoulders came forward slightly, the way his attention narrowed and focused. Garrity had learned to read this the way you learn to read weather. It didn't always mean trouble, but it usually meant Pruitt had decided something. "See that Maserati?" Pruitt said. "Yeah, watch it." Garrity watched. The car moved through the intersection at exactly the speed limit. It signaled before changing lanes, not a lazy last-second signal, but a deliberate early signal, the kind that a new driver makes when they are thinking carefully about every step. At the next intersection, it stopped completely at the red light, the nose of the car level with the stop line not an inch past. When the light changed, it accelerated smoothly and kept pace with the flow of traffic. "She's driving fine," Garrity said. Pruitt didn't answer. They followed for 6 blocks. 6 blocks during which Imani Weston did not commit a traffic violation, did not roll a stop sign, did not drift into another lane, did not exceed the speed limit by a single mile per hour. 6 blocks during which Pruitt's hand moved slowly, steadily toward the control panel for the light bar, the way a man's hand moves toward something he has already decided to do while his conscious mind is still constructing the justification. Garrity said, "There's a graduation cap on the passenger seat. I can see it from here." "I see it, and the plate matches the Sycamore Crest address." Pruitt's voice was patient the way a teacher's voice is patient when a student asks the wrong question. "In 10 years on this stretch of road, how many black teenage girls you think I've seen driving $200,000 cars that were actually theirs?" Garrity didn't answer. He couldn't answer because the answer required him to accept a premise he wasn't sure was a premise. "These people always have a story," Pruitt said. "Father's name, birthday present. They practice it. You'll hear it again." His hand moved to the light bar switch. "Just let me work." He keyed his radio dispatch unit 9, initiating a stop on Route 7 near the Crestfield Junction Plaza. Vehicle is a Maserati Levante midnight blue personalized plate, Imani 18. Registration comes back to a Weston at a Sycamore Crest address. But I've got a black female driver, looks about 17 or 18. Circumstances feel off. Going to have a conversation. Copy Unit 9. Need backup. Pruitt glanced at the Maserati, pulling smoothly into the plaza lot, signaling even as it turned. "Nah, he'll handle it." The lights came on. Imani saw the lights in the rearview mirror, and her body responded before her mind caught up. It was not panic. It was something more specific than panic, more trained. A cold drop in the stomach, a tightening across the shoulders, a sudden hyper-acute awareness of her own hands and exactly what they were doing and what they looked like doing it. Her eyes went immediately to the speedometer 39 in a 40 zone. To the mirror, the lane change she had made 2 blocks back had been signaled with plenty of time. To the road ahead, she had done nothing. She knew she had done nothing. She also knew with the particular clarity of someone who had been raised on a specific kind of knowledge, not taught in any single conversation, but absorbed over years. The way children absorb everything through attention and observation, and the accumulated evidence of a world that has always operated by a double standard. That having done nothing was not the same as being treated as though you had done nothing. Her father's voice comply first. "Fight later. Together." She signaled right. She pulled into the Crestfield Junction Plaza parking lot and chose a space near the entrance visible from the road, open on all sides, non-threatening. She put the car in park. She turned off the engine. She reached up and switched on the dome light, even in full afternoon sun. She lowered the window. She placed both hands on the steering wheel at 10 and 2 fingers spread wide, and she sat very still. Through the windshield, she could see the plaza entrance, the drugstore, a row of parked cars. A woman in scrubs near the pharmacy who had looked up from her phone at the sound of the siren and was now watching. Through the side mirror, she could see the patrol car parked at an angle behind her driver's door already open. The officer came from the driver's side. He was medium height, broad in the chest, moving with the deliberate, unhurried pace of someone who has time, because time is a thing that belongs to him. He had his flashlight out even in the 2:30 afternoon light, and he angled it at the driver's side window as he approached, creating an asymmetry. She could see the beam before she could clearly see his face. License and registration. No greeting. No explanation for the stop. Just the command, flat and direct. Officer Imani said, keeping her voice steady, keeping it audible, keeping it exactly where she needed it to be. May I ask why I've been stopped? License and registration, he said again. She moved slowly, both hands visible. Left hand to her purse on the passenger seat, fingers careful, deliberate. License extracted between two fingers. Right hand to the glove compartment. I'm reaching for the registration now, she said, announcing every movement because she had been taught to announce every movement, because the alternative was too awful to contemplate. Both documents slid through the window. The officer took them, held his flashlight over them. The license, Imani Janelle Weston, DOB, June 17th, age 18, as of today. Sycamore Crest address. The registration, Maserati Levante, registered to Marcus J. Weston, same address. He studied both for 40 seconds. At least 40 seconds. Imani counted. This your car? Yes, sir. It's registered to my father, but he gave it to me this morning. Today's my birthday. I turned 18 today. She watched something happen in his face when she said it, not quite recognition, not quite dismissal. More like the arrival of a confirmation, as if the explanation she had given, clean, direct, reasonable, landed in a pre-existing category labeled too prepared, and was filed there automatically the way a pattern does not check its own premises. Step out of the vehicle. Imani's hands tightened on the wheel, almost imperceptibly. Then she released them. Officer, can I ask why I'm being asked to step out? Step out of the vehicle, ma'am? The second mom had a particular quality, not courtesy. The performance of courtesy, which is different. She knew this moment. She had seen it play out on screens and documentaries, and in the late-night news feeds her father sometimes watched with his jaw set and his eyes very still. She knew what it looked like when it went right, and she knew what it looked like when it went wrong, and she knew that the variable between the two was not always something the person in the car could control, comply, survive. Fight later. She opened the door. The Maserati's door opened upward in its scissor hinge, a sweeping mechanical motion designed for showrooms and the open roads of the Italian countryside, theatrical and enormous in the context of a strip mall parking lot in Crestfield, North Carolina. The sound of it, the engineered extravagance of the mechanism, made the moment larger than she wanted it to be. People in the lot were already looking. Two men outside the pizza place, 3 doors down, had stopped eating. The woman in scrubs had put her phone away and was now watching with both hands at her sides. Imani stepped out. She was 5'8", the build of someone who had run cross-country for 4 years, wearing a white blouse and dark jeans and white sneakers. The outfit she had chosen this morning for lunch with her friends before any of this. She looked exactly like what she was, an 18-year-old girl who had been planning to have a birthday lunch. She stood straight, hands visible and open at her sides. Turn around, hands behind your back. Officer, I haven't done anything wrong. Her voice was still steady, still controlled. This car was a birthday gift from my father. His name is Marcus Weston, as the commanding officer at Langford Naval Station. If you call him right now, he can verify all of this. It would take 30 seconds. You're being detained for investigation of possible vehicle theft. He was reaching for his belt. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Please, she said it once, quietly, not as pleading as a final reasonable request. Please just call my father. 30 seconds. You can explain at the station. The handcuffs came out. She turned around. She did it because she had been told to, and because she had been raised by a man who understood that the moments when compliance feels most wrong are often precisely the moments when it is most necessary. Not because the system deserves your compliance, but because survival comes first, and justice comes after, and there is no justice for the dead. She turned around, and she did not resist, and she did not run, and she did not make a sound. The metal closed around her wrists with 2 small mechanical clicks. She would remember those clicks for the rest of her life with the physical specificity of things that get recorded below the level of ordinary memory. Not the sound exactly, but the sensation. The cold of the metal against her skin. The tightness which was 1 precise notch tighter than necessary. The complete and total removal of physical autonomy that comes with being bound in a public place with strangers watching and cameras recording, and the afternoon sun at full brightness overhead, because it was a beautiful Tuesday in June, and the world had not paused for any of this. She was 18 years old. She had a 4.4 GPA. She had been accepted to Annapolis. She had never in her life received so much as a detention slip at Jefferson Prep. She had spent the morning crying on her front step because her father had given her the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. And now she was standing handcuffed in the parking lot of the Crestfield Junction Plaza, while a crowd of strangers gathered and an old man she didn't know was holding up a phone and her graduation cap was still on the passenger seat of her car where she had left it. Brim-up tassel hanging sitting in the afternoon light through the windshield like a small, precise indictment of everything that was happening. Behind Pruitt's, back officer Sean Garrity stood near the hood of the Maserati with his hands on his belt and his eyes on his boots. He had looked up once when the handcuffs came out. He had looked at the graduation cap on the passenger seat. He had looked at the gold ribbon on the hood, slightly lopsided now from highway wind. He had looked at the registration, still in Pruitt's hand, Marcus J., Weston's sycamore crest, and he had looked at Imani standing straight, head up, hands bound behind her back in a public parking lot on her 18th birthday, and he had not said anything. He would think about that silence for the rest of his career. At the far edge of the parking lot, Earl Dupree was 68 years old. A retired Navy bosun's mate who had done 22 years and lived for the last 14 in the house 3 blocks from Crestfield Junction because it was affordable and quiet and his daughter's family was nearby. He had been walking home from the hardware store when he came through the parking lot and saw the Maserati with the personalized plate and the gold ribbon on the hood, and he had recognized both. The whole neighborhood south of Langford had been talking about the Admiral's gift to his daughter since the morning duty bus stop. Earl Dupree was not a man who was easily surprised by the world's capacity for injustice, but he was a man who believed in documentation. He opened his phone to Facebook Live and pressed record, and began to speak in the measured, unhurried cadence of someone who has been watching things unfold for 7 decades and has learned that accuracy is more powerful than outrage. "Folks," he said, "I need you to pay attention to what I am showing you right now." The rear door of the patrol car closed with a sound that was entirely different from the sound of a regular car door, heavier, more final, the specific terminal quality of a mechanism designed to seal rather than simply close. The interior smelled of industrial cleaner, and beneath it something the cleaner had never fully reached, a layered, embedded smell of fear and stress and human bodies in distress that had seeped into the hard plastic over years of use and would not come out no matter how thoroughly you scrubbed the surface. The back seat had no interior handles. There was a plexiglass partition between the seat and the front of the car, and beyond the partition, a wire mesh screen. And through the mesh, Imani could see the dashboard and the radio, and through the windshield the parking lot and the Maserati. The gold ribbon was still on the hood. Her graduation cap was still on the passenger seat exactly where she had placed it that morning when she left the house, because she had thought she might want it for the photograph at lunch. Brim up, tassel hanging. Nobody had touched it. She leaned back against the hard plastic partition and breathed. In for 4 counts, slow and deliberate. Hold for 4. Out for 4. Repeat. Her father had taught her this technique when she was 13 during one of the conversations she hadn't fully understood at the time, conversations that arrived without announcement and were delivered matter-of-factly the way you deliver information about weather or geography, because this was also a kind of geography. The landscape of a life lived in a specific body in a specific country. You learn the skill before you need it, he had told her, because by the time you need it, there is no room left to learn. She understood it now. Through the rear window, she could see Pruitt on his radio pacing with short, tight steps in the asphalt heat. He was calling for a tow truck. He was committed, which meant he was doubling down, which meant some part of him already understood he was wrong and was compensating by escalating rather than retreating. She had read this dynamic in a criminology elective at Jefferson Prep. She recognized it now in the clean, abstract way you recognize things you have studied, but never expected to experience from the inside of a police car on your birthday with your hands behind your back. Garrity was standing near the Maserati, hands on his belt, looking at nothing in particular, not searching the car, not checking anything, just standing there with the posture of someone who had been told to look useful and could not determine what useful looked like in this situation. Once he glanced toward the cruiser. Their eyes met briefly through the plexiglass and the mesh, and Imani held his gaze without expression, and he looked away first. The crowd in the parking lot had grown to perhaps 40 people. Several were recording openly on their phones. The woman in scrubs was on hers, talking fast. The older man in the VFW cap, Earl Dupree, though she didn't know his name, was holding his phone steady at chest height, broadcasting to an audience that at this moment had just ticked past 8,000 viewers and was climbing. Imani thought about her father. She thought about the specific pause before he had said what he didn't want to say this morning. The 2 or 3 seconds of silence that had contained the whole weight of 33 years of navigating a world that had given him everything and made him pay for every inch of it. He had known. He had bought her the most extraordinary thing he could imagine giving her, and he had known, not as a certainty, not as a prediction, but as a possibility too frequent to ignore, that this was something that could happen. And it had happened, and she was sitting in the back of a police car at 2:47 in the afternoon of her 18th birthday, breathing in 4s, watching the gold ribbon on the hood of her car move slightly in the June breeze, and she was waiting. She was very good at waiting. Her father had taught her that too. He had every right to drive away and call a lawyer, but he called his daughter first. Think about that for a moment. What would you have done if you got that phone call, if it was your child sitting in the back of that patrol car on their birthday? Would you have stayed calm, or would everything inside you have broken open? Tell me in the comments below. I want to hear from you, or from. And if this story is hitting you somewhere real, hit that like button and subscribe our channel, because we have more stories like this one, and every person in them deserves to be heard. At Gate 2 of Naval Station, Langford Corporal Deshaun Briggs was running a standard outbound vehicle inspection when the blue and red strobes appeared in his peripheral vision on the public road to the south. He completed the inspection military discipline, always finish what you start, and then he raised his standard-issue binoculars toward Route 7. He saw the Maserati. He recognized it immediately. He confirmed the plate. He watched the stop unfold, the approach, the exchange at the window, the door opening upward with its characteristic theatrical sweep, the girl stepping out onto the asphalt. He watched with the particular quality of attention that experienced military personnel develop for situations that do not feel right. The kind of attention that takes in information without yet drawing conclusions, accumulating detail until the picture is complete enough to act on. He watched the handcuffs go on. He waited 90 seconds, enough time to confirm what he was seeing was what he thought he was seeing. Enough time to be certain, and then he reached for the landline phone on the gate desk. The call connected in 9 seconds. Command duty, Langford. Captain Osei speaking. Captain, this is Briggs at Gate 2. I need to report a situation on Route 7. I've got eyes on a Crestfield PD traffic stop approximately half a mile south of the gate. The vehicle is the Admiral's daughter's Maserati. I've confirmed the plate. She appears to be in handcuffs, ma'am. A pause. Brief. Professional. You've visually confirmed it's her. Yes, ma'am. The plate is Imani 18. It's the car. Are MPS on scene? No, ma'am. Crestfield PD only. 2 officers. Time in handcuffs. Approximately 4 minutes since I confirmed, ma'am. Stop has been running about 8. Stand by. Captain Renata Osei was 29 years old, 8 years in naval aviation, 3 weeks into a command duty rotation that was supposed to be administrative, and she was making 3 phone calls in the next 4 minutes and 17 seconds. The first to the Langford Provost Marshal's office, where the watch officer was Master Sergeant Renee Polk, 12 years as a military police veteran with a compact, organized competence and a professional reputation for handling sensitive situations with the minimum necessary drama and the maximum possible effect. Polk, I need an MP response to Route 7 adjacent to Gate 2. Admiral Weston's daughter appears to have been detained by Crestfield PD. Time sensitive, Polk said, moving in 2 minutes, and she was. The second to Commander Harriet Knox, the Admiral's Chief of Staff. Knox knocked on the Admiral's office door, entered, and stood at the threshold until he looked up from his readiness reports. Then she said the words directly and without decoration because that was what he needed, sir. Gate. 2 reports, Imani has been detained by Crestfield PD on Route 7. She is in handcuffs. MPS are moving. The third call to Langford Public Affairs. Flag a potential media situation. Admiral Weston's daughter, civilian traffic stop handcuffs. Monitor civilian social media and scanner traffic immediately. All 3 calls took 4 minutes and 17 seconds. In his office at Langford headquarters, Marcus Weston stood up. His chair rolled back and hit the credenza with a sound that made the framed photograph from Imani's graduation rattle against the wall behind him, the photograph he had placed there yesterday evening before he went home, because he had wanted to see it first thing this morning and every morning after. Outside his window, the installation spread in every direction. Barracks and motor pools and training ranges and the parade field where he had taken command 3 years ago in a ceremony that his daughter had attended in a blue dress and watched with the expression of someone memorizing something they intend to carry for a long time. He could not see Route 7 from here, but he knew exactly where it was. His voice when it came was quiet, controlled, carrying the particular temperature of a very calm man reaching the edge of a very long patience. Not the temperature of someone about to lose control, but the temperature of someone who has decided with complete clarity exactly what he is going to do. Get me the Crestfield police chief on the phone, right now, and have my dress uniform brought to this office. Full regalia. 3-vehicle escort. Staff car ready in 4 minutes. Knox left. She returned in 90 seconds with the dress uniform on its hanger. The dark blue jacket. Light blue trousers with the gold stripe, white shirt, black tie. The uniform for the moments that require the full, unambiguous weight of authority to be visible from across a parking lot. While he changed, Knox patched through Chief Harlan Webb. Chief Harlan Webb was 54 years old and had run the Crestfield Police Department for 9 years through 2 mayoral administrations, a federal review, and a use of force settlement 3 years ago that he had managed without fully resolving. Because managing and resolving are different operations that produce different outcomes. He was not unintelligent. He understood from the first syllable of Marcus Weston's name that he was already behind in a situation he had not yet fully mapped. The Admiral did not match his careful, measured opening. He stated facts, just facts delivered with the weight of someone who has spent 33 years in rooms where the most powerful thing you can do is eliminate all unnecessary language and leave the situation standing alone, where everyone can see it. Chief Webb, my daughter is 18 years old. Today is her birthday. She is driving a vehicle I purchased for her as a birthday gift this morning. The vehicle is registered in my name. She has a valid driver's license and a current registration. All of this is verifiable with a single phone call that has not been made. Your officer has had my daughter in handcuffs for 16 minutes. Sir, I'm attempting to reach the officer on scene. I don't need you to reach him. I'm going there myself. A pause. Not hesitation, the deliberate space of someone giving the other party a chance to make the correct choice. I am giving you two options. Option 1, you call that officer right now and tell him to release my daughter. Option 2, I arrive at your officer scene in my staff car with my command flags flying, and you deal with the consequences of that arrival. I suggest you decide quickly. You have 5 minutes. Sir, I understand you're concerned, but procedure. Your procedure has had my daughter in handcuffs for 16 minutes for receiving a birthday present. You have 4 minutes and 30 seconds. A pause. The sound of a man who has just understood the full shape of the situation he is in. Yes, sir. I'll make the call immediately. Good. He hung up. Looked at Knox. Time to scene. 4 minutes, sir. Then let's not waste them. Sergeant Diana Okafor had been with the Crestfield PD for 14 years. She was 41 years old, compact and quick-eyed, with the habitual watchfulness of someone who had learned to read situations faster than she perhaps should have needed to, because the situations that mattered most were often the ones that looked most ordinary on approach. She pulled into the Crestfield Junction Plaza at 2:49 and read the scene in the first 10 seconds. Not as a checklist, as a single integrated impression that arrived complete the way experience compresses 1,000 observations into an immediate understanding 18-year-old black girl in handcuffs beside a Maserati with a gold ribbon on the hood. Crowd of 40-plus people with phones uniformly elevated. Parking lot in direct line of sight of Langford Gate 2. Pruitt standing near his cruiser with the rigid posture of someone committed to a position he was not ready to abandon. Garrity near the Maserati looking at asphalt. She also saw with a physical jolt she would not describe to anyone for several days 2 black SUVs with U.S. Army markings turning into the far end of the lot with the purposeful velocity of vehicles that know exactly where they are going. She went to Pruitt first. Talk to me. What do we have? Possible vehicle theft. Driver's 18. Vehicle registered to someone else. Claims birthday gift from her father, but can't. Did you verify with the registered owner? I was in the process. Okafor's voice dropped to the register she used when she needed to be heard without being loud. Dale, she's been in handcuffs for 17 minutes. How long does it take to dial a phone number? I was following standard procedure. Detain first, verify second. That is backwards. What was your probable cause for the initial stop? The silence that followed lasted just long enough to answer the question. Pruitt's jaw moved. He started to say something about instinct, about experience, about the way the girl had been driving too carefully like she was working at it, and Okafor listened to approximately 8 words of this, and then she was done. She was already forming the direct order, already reaching for the authority she had every right to exercise. And then Master Sergeant Renee Polk stepped out of the lead military SUV and crossed the parking lot with the focused efficiency of someone who has not come here to discuss anything. Polk identified herself. She stated clearly, and without space for misinterpretation, that the individual in Pruitt's custody was the dependent daughter of Admiral Marcus Weston, commanding officer of Naval Station Langford. She confirmed the vehicle had been purchased that morning as a birthday gift. She confirmed the registration, the valid license, the current insurance. She said all of it was verifiable with a single phone call and had been verifiable from the moment Pruitt had asked for license and registration. Okafor turned to Pruitt. Remove the handcuffs, right now, before this gets worse. Sarge, I've already initiated the arrest, Dale. Her voice was flat and absolute and carried no room for anything further. You put handcuffs on a 4-star admiral's daughter for receiving a birthday present. Take them off right now. Pruitt understood in the specific physical way that consequences sometimes arrive before the mind has fully processed them, that there was no version of the next 10 minutes that went well for him. He walked to the cruiser. He opened the rear door. He fumbled with the handcuff key. His hands were not entirely steady. The cuffs came off with 2 small clicks, the reverse of the 2 that had closed them 23 minutes earlier. The crowd felt the convoy before they saw it. It was not sound, not yet. It was a shift in the quality of collective attention, a change in the way the 40-odd people in the parking lot were oriented, the way a room full of people will turn toward a door before it opens, if they have been waiting long enough. Earl Dupree, whose Facebook Live had just crossed 41,000 concurrent viewers, said into his phone in the same measured, unhurried voice he had been using for 23 minutes, "Folks, something's coming." 3 Chevrolet Suburbans' black government plates turned into the north end of Route 7. They were moving at a pace that was not aggressive, not racing, not urgent, the way emergency vehicles are urgent, but unmistakably intentional. The pace of vehicles that have already calculated every variable and have no uncertainty about the destination. On the front fenders of the lead vehicle, mounted on small chrome brackets, were 2 flags, not large, precisely regulation size. The personal command flags of a flag officer, 4 white stars on a field of red. Master Sergeant Polk, standing near the second military SUV, saw them and made the small, reflexive adjustment of posture that happens below conscious thought in the presence of superior rank, the kind of thing that happens to people who have served long enough that certain responses have moved below the level of choice. The 4 MPs beside her made the same adjustment at approximately the same moment, a synchronized straightening that rippled through the group like a small wave. Officer Dale Pruitt saw the flags and felt for the first time in 23 minutes the full weight of what he had done. It arrived not as a thought, but as a physical sensation, a dropping, hollowing feeling in the chest, sharp enough that his hand moved to the hood of his cruiser without intention, the unconscious seeking of something solid. He knew those flags. He had worked the Route 7 corridor for 5 years, half a mile from the largest naval installation in the southeastern United States, and he knew what 4 stars meant. He knew the rank, the authority, the scale of what it represented. He knew that at any given moment there were fewer than 40 officers in the entire United States Navy who held that rank. And he knew with a cold, concrete certainty that landed in his stomach like something swallowed wrong that one of those 40 men was in that lead vehicle coming here because his daughter was standing in this parking lot with red marks on her wrists. He reached for his radio out of reflex. His hand stopped. There was no call to make. There was no supervisor to reach who could contain this. No report to file that would file it away. No union rep who could make what he had done disappear. He had put this man's daughter in handcuffs in front of 40-plus witnesses with 40-plus phones actively recording. He had done it within clear sight of the man's own base. He had done it for 23 minutes without making a single verification call. The convoy parked with drill ground precision. The vehicles stopped. The engines idled. The doors remained closed. The parking lot went quiet. 10 seconds passed. Then the rear door of the lead vehicle opened. Admiral Marcus Jared Weston stepped onto the asphalt of the Crestfield Junction Plaza parking lot at 3:04 in the afternoon, and the crowd went completely silent. He was 54 years old, 6 feet 2 inches tall, broad through the shoulders, with the bearing of a man who has spent 33 years in physical environments where strength and composure were not optional. He wore the naval service dress blue uniform, the dark jacket, the gold-striped trousers, the white shirt and black tie, and the uniform was covered in ribbons. 41 of them arranged in precise geometric rows on the left chest, the Distinguished Service Cross at the center, 2 silver stars, a purple heart, 36 additional decorations representing 33 years of service rendered at cost. On his shoulder boards, 4 silver stars. He did not look at Pruitt. He did not look at the crowd or the cameras or the phones or Earl Dupree's Facebook Live now at 78,000 concurrent viewers and climbing by the second. He looked only at his daughter, and he walked toward her, measured, deliberate, unhurried, with the full awareness of every eye in the lot tracking every step. The MPs came to attention as he passed. The crowd parted without being asked because some things require no direction, because the specific quality of this man's movement through the space communicated something that bypassed language entirely. And Pruitt stood 12 feet to the side and watched the Admiral walk past him without acknowledgement, without a glance, without the slightest indication that Pruitt occupied the same physical space. And he understood then with a completeness that would outlast the day and the month and the year that this was the judgment. Not the confrontation that was coming, not the legal proceedings that would follow. This, the deliberate, practiced, absolute non-acknowledgement of a man who had decided that his daughter was more important than the person who had harmed her, and that the person who had harmed her did not warrant his attention until his daughter had been attended to. That was worse than anything else that happened. Admiral Weston reached Amani. He took her hands in both of his, gently, carefully, the way you handle something that matters, and turned them over palms up in the afternoon light. He looked at the red marks on her wrists. The deep grooves the metal had left in her brown skin, still vivid, the kind that would be visible for hours. He was still for 3 full seconds. In those 3 seconds that the crowd watched and Earl Dupree did not narrate and the cameras recorded without commentary, because there was nothing to say that the image did not already contain something moved behind the controlled surface of his face. Not rage, not grief exactly. Something older and more specific than either the feeling of a man who has spent 33 years building something, fighting something, earning something specifically so that this moment would not be possible, and who has just been informed in the most concrete terms available that the building is not done. He deployed every resource he had. 33 years of discipline, of learning to absorb damage without transmitting it, of understanding that in any situation where people are watching you and depending on you, composure is not self-service but duty. He pressed down against what was burning in his chest. His jaw tightened once, then he was composed. He looked at her face. His voice was quiet enough for only her. "Are you hurt?" "No, sir." Her voice was steady. She had kept it steady through 23 minutes and she was going to keep it steady now. "I'm okay." "Did they mistreat you physically?" "Number. She found the words. They didn't believe the car was mine." "I know, baby." He held her hands for one more moment. "I'm here now." He looked at Master Sergeant Polk. "Take my daughter to the staff car. Commander Knox stays with her." "Yes, sir." He watched Polk walk Imani to the lead Suburban, watched Knox open the door, watched his daughter step inside. Then he turned. He did not go to Pruitt. He did not cross the parking lot toward the patrol car and the patrol officer who had put his child in handcuffs for 23 minutes on her birthday. He simply stood in full dress uniform, 4 silver stars. The personal command flags of a United States Navy admiral flying from the staff car 20 feet behind him, and he waited. As if moving toward Pruitt was something he had decided was not worth the effort. As if the correct configuration was for Pruitt to come to him, because that was the only configuration that accurately represented the relationship between what each of these men had built and who each of these men was. Pruitt had no alternative. He walked across the asphalt. Each step across that parking lot covered approximately 3 feet of ground and cost something that Dale Pruitt did not have the vocabulary to name. He stopped close enough for conversation. Close enough to see without any softening distance the full extent of what was in front of him. The uniform, the ribbons, the 41 decorations, the 4 stars on the shoulders, the face of a man who had driven from a naval installation to a strip mall parking lot in his dress uniform to collect his daughter from the back seat of a police car on her birthday. Close enough to understand in a way that had not been available to him 23 minutes ago exactly what he had done. Admiral Weston spoke. He did not raise his voice. He did not gesture. He stated facts in sequence without decoration, the way he had stated facts in briefing rooms and combat situations in the offices of 4 presidents with the authority of someone who has never needed volume to be heard. My daughter is 18 years old. Today is her birthday. She was driving a vehicle I purchased for her as a birthday gift this morning. The vehicle is registered in my name at the address on her license. Her license is valid. Her registration is current. Her insurance is current. None of this required anything more than a phone call to verify. That phone call was not made. Your officer followed her for 6 blocks without a traffic violation, initiated a stop without documented probable cause, removed her from her vehicle without justification, and placed her in handcuffs for 23 minutes in a public parking lot while a crowd recorded it on their phones. He paused, not for effect, because he was giving Pruitt space to respond. Pruitt said something about instinct, about experience, about reading a situation. He said it in the tone of a man who has been rehearsing this justification for 23 minutes and has discovered on delivery that it does not hold the weight he had counted on. The Admiral let him finish. Then, Officer Pruitt, what you are describing as instinct is a decision your brain made in 4 seconds based on information that had nothing to do with traffic law or public safety. You ran the plate. It came back clean. The registration matched a residential address. The driver matched the registered address. None of that information changed your decision because the decision had already been made before any of that information arrived. Another pause. That is not experience. That is a model of the world that excluded a possibility that was standing directly in front of you, and my daughter paid for it. He looked at Sergeant Okafor. Sergeant? Yes, sir. I trust you understand what needs to happen next. Yes, sir. I do. He looked once more at Pruitt, not the long look of someone making a final point, but the brief, completed look of someone who has finished with a subject, and then he turned and walked back to his staff car. Earl Dupree, broadcasting to 89,000 viewers, said quietly, "And that, folks, is what accountability looks like." He never raised his voice, not once. He stood in that parking lot and laid out the facts like someone who has never needed anger to be devastating, because truth, when delivered with that kind of precision, does not need anything else. I keep thinking about that walk Pruitt had to make across that asphalt. What do you think went through his mind in those steps? What would have gone through yours? Tell me in the comments. I read every one, and if you have not already subscribed, our channel now is a good time. There are more stories like this one, and the people in them deserve an audience. At 4:15 in the afternoon, 71 minutes after the handcuffs went on, Earl Dupree ended his Facebook Live broadcast at 214,000 views with the words, "Justice is on its way, folks." I've seen it before. It moves slow sometimes, but when it moves, it moves. He was right on both counts. By 4:30, the recording was on every local news station in North Carolina. Not the full broadcast, the key segments. Imani stepping out of the Maserati with her hands spread wide. The handcuffs going on, the convoy arriving, the Admiral standing in the parking lot in full dress uniform. These were the images that traveled first because they told the story without requiring narration. The Crestfield PD dispatch recording surfaced at 4:40 Pruitt's voice on the radio. His exact words, "I've got a black female driver, looks about 17 or 18. Circumstances feel off. Combined with the footage, it answered every question anyone might have had about the probable cause for the stop. By 6 o'clock, Chief Harlan Webb issued a statement consisting of 4 sentences. He expressed concern. He announced that Officer Pruitt had been placed on administrative leave with pay pending investigation. He said the department took all allegations of misconduct seriously. He did not apologize. He did not acknowledge that anything had gone wrong. He said allegations even though there were 40-plus witnesses and approximately 37 separate video recordings and a dispatch transcript. By 7:30, Victor Calloway had arrived at the house on Sycamore Crest. Victor was 56 years old, a former JAG officer who had known Marcus Weston since the Gulf and had spent the last 20 years as one of the foremost civil rights litigators in the state of North Carolina. He sat at Pearl's kitchen table with a yellow legal pad and a pen and asked Imani to tell him exactly what happened in the order it happened without editorializing. She did. He wrote for 45 minutes and asked 9 specific questions, and then he sat back and looked at what he had written. "How do you feel?" he asked her. "Like I want something to actually change," she said. Calloway looked at the Admiral. The Admiral looked at his daughter. Something passed between them that did not require words. "Then let's make something change," Calloway said. By 8 o'clock, the governor of North Carolina called Marcus Weston directly. The conversation lasted 11 minutes. The Attorney General called 40 minutes later. The Federal Department of Justice Civil Rights Division began reviewing Pruitt's stop data, the full 5-year data set from the Route 7 corridor the following morning. By midnight, the NAACP had filed a formal complaint. The North Carolina Civil Liberties Union had announced an independent review, and a data journalist at the Charlotte Observer had obtained the Crestfield PDS traffic stop records through a public records request filed approximately 6 hours after the video appeared online, because some things that have been sitting in databases waiting for someone to look at them finally have someone looking. What the data showed was not subtle. It was not borderline. In 5 years, Pruitt had stopped black drivers at a rate 2.1 times their proportion in Route 7 traffic. His vehicle search rate for black drivers was 34%. His vehicle search rate for white drivers was 9%. His contraband hit rate on those searches, the percentage of searches that actually found something, was 4.2% for black drivers and 11.8% for white drivers. What this meant, translated from the statistical language into ordinary English, was that he had been stopping black drivers at twice the rate, searching them at nearly 4 times the rate, and finding things at less than a third of the rate compared to white drivers, which meant that the stops were not producing results, which meant they were not primarily about traffic safety or contraband interdiction, which meant something else entirely. The Charlotte Observer published the piece at 6:15 the following morning under the headline, "The Numbers Behind the Stop." The Internal Affairs review lasted 3 weeks. It was conducted by an outside investigator, a retired federal investigator named Marguerite Sands, brought in at Calloway's insistence, because the department's internal review apparatus had the same conflict of interest problem that police department internal review apparatuses always have, which is that the people conducting the review are employed by the same organization as the person being reviewed. Sands interviewed everyone. She interviewed Pruitt, who gave her the instinct narrative. She interviewed Garrity, who had 24 hours to decide what he was going to say, and used 18 of them. She interviewed Okafor, who gave her a precise account of exactly what she had observed, timed, and sequenced, and documented in the notes she had made in her car on the way back to the precinct. She interviewed the dispatcher who had received Pruitt's radio call. She interviewed Earl Dupree. She interviewed Patricia Givens, the woman in scrubs who had filmed 4 minutes and 12 seconds of continuous footage, including the moment the handcuffs were applied. On the 11th day of the review, Sands called Garrity back in. She sat across from him in a small conference room at the Crestfield PD, and she asked him directly, "At any point during the traffic stop, did you have any reason to believe the vehicle had actually been stolen?" Garrity looked at his hands. He had spent 11 days making a decision that most people would not have needed 11 days to make, because most decisions that seem hard from the inside are hard only because of what they cost, not because of what is right. He knew what was right. He had known what was right standing in that parking lot with his eyes on his boots. He had simply not been ready to pay the cost. He looked up at Sands. "No, ma'am. I did not have reason to believe the vehicle was stolen. I saw a graduation cap on the passenger seat and a gold ribbon on the hood and a registration that matched the driver's address. I didn't say anything. That was wrong. I should have said something. That's on me. The IA report was completed on day 22. Its findings were clear and unreserved. Pruitt had initiated a traffic stop without articulable, reasonable suspicion of a traffic violation or criminal activity. He had ordered a driver out of her vehicle without justification. He had placed her in handcuffs without probable cause for arrest. He had failed to perform a basic verification that was available to him within seconds and would have resolved the situation entirely. The report recommended termination. Calloway had filed the civil suit on day 4. The defendants, Pruitt in his personal capacity, the city of Crestfield, and the Crestfield PD. The causes of action: Fourth Amendment violation for the unlawful seizure, Fourth Amendment violation for the false arrest and deprivation of rights under federal civil rights law. He also filed a motion arguing that qualified immunity did not apply to Pruitt because the right to be free from arrest without probable cause was not a novel legal question. It was the most basic constitutional right in the book. The police union reviewed the file for 48 hours and then quietly declined to provide Pruitt with legal representation. Pruitt had to hire his own attorney. He used his savings first. Then he refinanced his house. The attorney explained to him what a jury trial would look like, given the footage, the dispatch recording the IA report, Garrity's testimony, and the 5-year stop data, now thoroughly reported in 17 different publications. Pruitt took the plea deal. He lost his law enforcement certification permanently. He received 2 years probation. He lost his pension because the pension board determined that the conduct underlying the criminal charges constituted misconduct that made him ineligible for retirement benefits. The civil suit settled 14 months after the stop. Marcus Weston donated every dollar of the settlement to the Naval Justice Fund. 1 year after the stop, Dale Pruitt was working the night shift at a regional logistics warehouse outside Greensboro, unloading trucks that arrived between midnight and 6 in the morning. He had a lot of time in those hours to think. In the single interview he gave to a police reform podcast produced by a Raleigh journalism school, he said, "I told myself I was acting on experience. But experience is just pattern recognition. And my patterns were wrong. I put a girl in handcuffs on her birthday because I could not imagine that her father had built what he built. 33 years, 4 stars, a Distinguished Service Cross. I could not imagine it. Not because I'm stupid, but because somewhere in 11 years of stops that nobody ever looked at closely, I had built a picture of the world that didn't have room for what was actually standing in front of me. And I acted on that picture, and she paid for it." The podcast episode was used in law enforcement training programs in 9 states within 8 months. Because Garrity had testified truthfully at the IA review in his sworn deposition for the civil case in every proceeding where his account was relevant, and because Admiral Weston had specifically and personally requested that the department consider leniency in Garrity's case, Garrity kept his badge. The Admiral's letter on Garrity's behalf was 3 paragraphs long. It said Officer Garrity did not do the right thing in the parking lot. He knows this. He has said so under oath without being asked to and without his testimony being compelled. The question now is not whether we punish him for what he failed to do, it is whether we give him the opportunity to become the officer he should have been in that moment. I believe he has earned that opportunity. This is my request, not my demand. You will make the decision you believe is correct. But I wanted you to know that from the perspective of the family that was most directly affected by what happened on Route 7 Officer Garrity's, honesty mattered. It matters when someone in a position of power tells the truth at a cost to themselves. I think it is worth preserving that. Garrity was reassigned to a different district, enrolled in a mandatory training program, and placed under enhanced supervision for 24 months. He stayed. He did the work. He carried with him, for the remainder of his career, the specific weight of what happens when you know something is wrong, and choose silence because that weight does not lift when the situation resolves. It becomes part of you, a particular kind of knowledge that makes you different afterward, if you let it. Chief Webb resigned 6 weeks after the stop requested to do so by the Crestfield City Council after the IA report made his management of Pruitt's complaint history public. The 9 complaints, the 7 involving drivers of color. The twice he had asked for a deeper review and been told it wasn't possible. The 10 years of Route 7 stop data he had possessed and never once examined. He packed his office on a Tuesday morning and left through the back door. 4 months after the stop, 4 months and 2 days, Admiral Marcus Jared Weston appeared before the North Carolina Senate Judiciary Committee on Police Reform and Racial Profiling. He wore his dress uniform. He brought data. The room was full. Every seat in the committee chambers was occupied. The overflow crowd filled the hallway outside and 3 ante-room viewing areas. Reporters from 17 news organizations were credentialed. C-SPAN had a camera. The North Carolina legislative record would later note that it was the most attended Judiciary Committee hearing in the current decade. The Admiral had declined the option to testify in civilian clothes. He had considered it, had actually sat down with Calloway the evening before and discussed whether the uniform was a choice that served the purpose or a choice that served the performer. He concluded it served the purpose. Not because it was impressive, but because it was accurate. He was testifying as an officer of the United States Navy with 33 years of documented federal service, and accuracy required that fact to be visible. He spoke for 45 minutes. The testimony was notable not primarily for its emotion, though the emotion was there precisely held, allowed to be present without being displayed. It was notable for its specificity. He did not testify about his feelings. He did not testify about the general problem of racial profiling in American policing. He testified about the specific numbers from the Crestfield PD Route 7 data. He testified about the specific consequences of a decision-making framework that generates stops based on assumption rather than articulable evidence. He testified about what the numbers showed when you looked at police department stop data across the state, which departments were verifying registrations before arresting people which were not, and what the outcomes looked like in each category. He had worked with Calloway and a team from the UNC School of Law's Criminal Justice Clinic to compile the supporting data. It was not anecdotal. It was not rhetorical. It was a comparative analysis of traffic stop outcomes in jurisdictions with and without mandatory verification protocols, and it showed in the kind of numbers that are difficult to argue with in a public forum that verification protocols improved outcomes for everyone. They reduced false arrests. They reduced civil liability exposure for departments. They increased the ratio of stops that produced actual evidence of actual violations, and they reduced the rate of complaints against officers. Senator Gerald Oaks, a Republican from Randolph County who had served 2 tours as an Army infantry officer in the early 2000s, stood to speak after the testimony concluded. He looked at the Admiral across the committee table and said, "Sir, I served under you in Djibouti in 2004. I watched you make decisions under circumstances that most people in this room cannot imagine. What you've done here, taking this particular fire and turning it into something that might protect someone else's daughter, that is the kind of leadership this state needs." The Amani Weston Act was introduced the following week. Its core provisions, mandatory identity and registration verification within 10 minutes for all traffic stops where the stated grounds are other than a specific documented moving violation. A prohibition on vehicle searches based solely on demographic factors without corroborating evidence of specific criminal activity. mandatory data reporting for all traffic stops, broken down by race of driver and outcome submitted quarterly to a new state oversight office. An independent civilian law enforcement review commission with genuine subpoena power, not advisory, not a study board, a body with actual authority. The bill passed the House 91-32. It passed the Senate 34-16. It was signed into law 58 days after Imani Weston stood handcuffed in the Crestfield Junction Plaza parking lot on her 18th birthday. The data from Crestfield PD in the 18 months following the Imani Weston Act told a story that was, depending on how you chose to read it, either encouraging or damning, or both at once, which is perhaps the most honest reading. Investigatory stops of black drivers for nonspecific pretexts down 44%. Vehicle searches of black drivers down 51%. The contraband hit rate on the remaining searches went from 4.2% under the old patterns to 48% under the new protocols, which meant that when officers were required to base stops and searches on articulable evidence rather than assumption, they found evidence of actual violations at 11 times the rate they had found it before, which meant, stated in the plainest possible terms, that Pruitt's method had not been effective at finding criminals. It had been effective at stopping black people. Complaints alleging racial discrimination in traffic stops down 61%. The new chief of Crestfield PD, appointed by the city council following Webb's resignation, was a woman named Patricia Chen, who had spent 14 years in Charlotte-Mecklenburg before accepting the Crestfield position on the condition that she had full authority to restructure the department's training and accountability functions. At a law enforcement conference in Asheville, 14 months after the stop, she said, "I am the chief who inherited the department that had to call a 4-star admiral and tell him we had arrested his daughter for receiving a birthday present." That was the most embarrassing phone call in Crestfield PD's institutional history. It was also the phone call that finally forced us to look at data we had been generating for a decade and refusing to examine. We had an officer with 5 years of racially disparate enforcement patterns, and we never flagged it because we were not looking. That is a failure of leadership. I would rather stand in front of you having fixed it late than pretend it didn't need fixing. A law changed because one family refused to stay quiet. Think about that. The data was sitting in the database the whole time, 11 years of numbers that told the story, and nobody looked until a 4-star admiral made it impossible to look away. What does it take for the right people to finally look? I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Subscribe our channel if you have not already. These stories need an audience, and you being here matters more than you know. Sergeant Diana Okafor was promoted to lieutenant and appointed head of the newly established Crestfield PD Training and Accountability Division. She designed the initial training curriculum herself, working with officers from the State Attorney General's office and a professor from Campbell University's law school. At the center of every cohort's first week, the Route 7 body camera footage played in full with Okafor walking the room through Pruitt's decision-making frame by frame, not to humiliate him, not to use his failure as spectacle, but to make visible in precise and concrete terms every moment at which a different choice had been available and had not been made. At the end of the first training session, a 23-year-old officer from Hoke County raised his hand. "Lieutenant, what would the right call have been right at the beginning?" Okafor looked at him. "The right call was not to make the stop. But if you're in the car and your partner is making the stop, and you're pretty sure it's wrong, the right call is to say so. Out loud, in the moment, not in the deposition." She let that sit for a moment. Officer Garrity was a good man who made a bad choice at the critical moment. The good news is that a bad choice in a critical moment is recoverable if you tell the truth afterward. The better news is that you can make the right choice in the moment. It costs you something. It's worth it. 11 states adopted versions of the Imani-Weston Act within 2 years. The work was uneven, the way reform work always is. Some versions had teeth. Some versions had the form of the law and not the substance. But the number that mattered most, the number that Calloway put in the speech he gave at the UNC law commencement 14 months after the stop, was the number of false arrests that the verification mandate had prevented. In the 11 states with the strongest implementations in the first year of operation, 847 documented cases in which a mandatory verification call had been made, and the information from that call had changed the outcome of the stop from arrest to release. 847 people who went home. 3 months after the stop, on the first morning of September, Imani Weston loaded 2 duffel bags and a box of books into the Maserati Levante and drove to Annapolis alone. She had asked her father specifically not to make the trip a convoy, not to have it become an occasion with vehicles and ceremony and the weight of everything that had happened in the intervening months. She wanted to drive up herself. She wanted the road to be hers. He had looked at her for a long moment across the kitchen table with Pearl's coffee growing cold between them, and then he had said, "All right?" Just those 2 words, which meant the same thing they always meant when he said them. "I trust you. I believe in you. He'll be here when you get back." She took I-95 north out of Crestfield in the early morning, the midnight blue Levante moving through the light traffic of a holiday weekend with the steady, quiet confidence of a car that was built for exactly this long distances open road, the particular pleasure of a well-made thing, doing what it was made to do. She passed the Langford perimeter on Route 7 heading north, and she looked at Gate 2 as she went by, and Corporal Briggs was there at his post, and he raised a hand as she passed, and she raised one back. She did not stop. She had a road to drive. She stopped once for gas in Maryland, once for coffee in Delaware, and she arrived at the United States Naval Academy at Annapolis in the early afternoon of a day that was clear and cool with the particular light of early September, which is different from any other light, sharper, the shadows longer, the colors more concentrated, as though the summer has finally agreed to become something else. She drove through the stone gate and onto the grounds of an institution that had been producing naval officers since 1845, and she found the in-processing station for new plebes and pulled into the parking area designated for incoming vehicles, and a third-year midshipman named Kowalski, who had been assigned to the vehicle registration intake desk that afternoon, looked up from his clipboard. He looked at the car. He looked at the registration Imani handed him. He looked at the name on the registration, Marcus J. Weston. He looked at it for 1 second. Not 10 seconds. Not the studied, skeptical scrutiny of a man who has already decided something and is looking for confirmation. 1 second, the kind of look that costs nothing and requires no calculation and carries no arithmetic. Then he looked up at Imani and said without particular drama, with the matter-of-fact recognition of someone stating something that is simply true General Weston's daughter, "Welcome to Annapolis, ma'am. Your father's a legend here. No questions. No concern about the registration name being different from hers. No pause while he made a calculation about who she was and what she was doing with a car like that in a place like this. Just the acknowledgement, uncomplicated and complete, that she was here, that she had earned the right to be here, that the man whose name was on the registration had been building something for 33 years, and she was part of what he had built. She called her father that night from her bunk in the barracks. He picked up on the first ring. She told him about Midshipman Kowalski, about the registration, about the 1 second that had not cost anything. She told him that nobody had questioned it, had just welcomed her. And she heard something in the quality of his silence before he spoke. Not the silence of a man who had nothing to say, The silence of a man who has been carrying a specific weight for 33 years and has just been told quietly and without ceremony by his daughter calling from her first night at the Naval Academy that the weight can be set down now. Not forever, but here, for this moment. That's how it should be, baby girl. He said that's what I've been fighting for. She told him she loved him. He told her to make him proud. She said she already had. They were both right. The Maserati sits in the garage at Sycamore Crest now when Imani is at Annapolis. Pearl keeps it company. Marcus drives it on Sunday mornings sometimes when the neighborhood is quiet and Pearl's French toast is on the stove, and the light is the particular clear light of a morning that has not yet decided what it will become. He thinks on those mornings about the 847 people who went home because a law changed. He thinks about every kid on every Route 7 in every city that doesn't make the news driving carefully, hands visible, doing everything right, waiting for the world to look at them, the way Midshipman Kowalski looked at his daughter plainly without arithmetic as someone who simply belongs here. He drives carefully on those mornings. He keeps his hands at 10 and 2, and sometimes when the road is quiet and the light is right, and the world feels briefly like it is getting there slowly, imperfectly, at the cost of too much and the labor of too many. He lets himself believe that it actually is. If this story moved you, if it stayed with you, please share it, not for the numbers. Because every story like this one is a reminder that dignity is not something that can be taken away permanently, no matter how hard someone tries. Like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it and subscribe our channel because there are more stories coming and every one of them deserves a witness. Thank you for staying until the end of this story. Stories like Imani's are not easy to sit with. They ask something of you and you showed up and gave it. That matters more than we can say. We will see you in the next one.